Think about the relationship that ended, the one you were certain about, the one that, when it was over, you told yourself, never again. And then, some months later, or some years, you found yourself standing in a different place with a different person, having the same argument, same dynamic, same wound, same feeling of being unseen in precisely the same way, different person, different name, the same relationship. Most people, when this happens, blame the other person, or blame their own taste, or decide the world simply does not contain the right people for them. Carl Jung had a different answer, and it is considerably more uncomfortable than any of those. The pattern, he said, is not about the other person. It was never about the other person. It is about what you have not yet been willing to look at inside yourself. Jung's central insight. Jung's starting point was a radical claim. The unconscious mind is not simply the place where forgotten things go. It is an active force, a director, one that shapes who we are drawn to, what we feel in another person's presence, which relationships we pursue, and which we flee and outdate, largely without the involvement of the conscious mind. And the unconscious, Jung observed, has a particular relationship with the unresolved. Whatever you have not yet worked through, the wound from the parent who could not see you, the part of yourself you exiled because it was not acceptable, the grief that was never fully felt, the need you learned to call weakness, the unconscious draws you towards those situations that recreate the conditions in which that material lives, not to punish you, to give you another opportunity to finally face it. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The repeating relationship is not bad luck. It is the unconscious delivering the same curriculum until the lesson is finally learned. 5 reasons this happens. 5 ways the unconscious writes the pattern, each one worth understanding. Because understanding is where the repetition ends. The 5 reasons. Reason 1, the unconscious blueprint. Before you ever consciously chose a partner, your unconscious had already constructed a template, built over years, through observation, through early experience, through every significant relationship you witnessed or lived through before you were old enough to examine any of it critically. This template is not a list of preferences, it is something deeper and less visible than that. It is a felt sense of what love feels like, what closeness feels like, what safety feels like, or what the absence of it feels like if that was more consistent in your early experience. And when you meet someone who activates that template, who produces that felt sense, that particular quality of familiarity, the unconscious registers, this is it. This is the one. Even when the conscious mind has reservations, even when the warning signs are visible, even when the friends who love you are quietly concerned. The blueprint was written before you had language. It does not respond to logic, it responds to resonance. And if the blueprint was shaped by conditions that were painful, by inconsistency, by emotional unavailability, by love that came with conditions, then the people who resonate most strongly will often be the ones who carry those same conditions. Not because you want to be hurt, because familiar to the unconscious is not the same word as safe. Reason 2, shadow attraction. Jung described the shadow as the repository of everything we have decided we cannot be. The qualities we were taught were unacceptable, the emotions we learned to suppress, the parts of ourselves we exiled in order to be loved, to be approved of, to fit inside the identity we decided was survivable. These exiled parts do not disappear, they go underground. And from underground, they surface in a particular way in love. We are drawn with unusual intensity to people who embody what we have buried in ourselves. The person who suppressed their anger entirely finds themselves in relationship after relationship with people who express it freely, sometimes destructively. The person who exiled their neediness keeps attracting deeply, emotionally dependent partners. The person who was never allowed to be playful is magnetically drawn to people who live with reckless freedom. This is not mere coincidence. It is the shadow recognizing itself in the other person and responding with something that feels like love, but is at its root recognition. Jung was clear on what this means. Until you are willing to reclaim what you have exiled in yourself, you will keep seeking it in others. And what you seek in others, you cannot fully receive, because the need is not for them to carry it. The need is for you to own it. Reason 3, projection. This is where the pattern becomes most difficult to see, because projection is invisible from the inside. Projection, in Jungian psychology, is the mechanism by which we take what is unexamined inside ourselves and place it unconsciously without any intention onto another person. And then we respond to it there where it feels safer to confront. In the early stages of romantic love, projection runs at extraordinary intensity. We see in the other person qualities that may genuinely exist in them, but we amplify, idealize, and complete the picture with material from our own unconscious. We fall in love not with who they are. We fall in love with who we need them to be, and then time passes, the projection begins to lift, the real person, complex, inconsistent, human, starts to emerge from behind the image we placed over them, and we feel, often with a shock that seems disproportionate, that they have changed, that they are not who we thought they were, that something has been lost. They have not changed. The projection has simply thinned, and what we are mourning is not them. It is the image we constructed and briefly believed in. Until the projection is recognized for what it is, we will keep casting the same film with a new actor in the lead role. Reason 4, the Anima and the Animus. This is one of Jung's most specific and most misunderstood concepts, and one of the most important for understanding why love repeats. Jung observed that within every human psyche there exists an inner figure of the opposite gender, a contrasexual aspect of the unconscious that represents the qualities, values, and ways of being that our dominant gender identity has not fully integrated. He called the feminine figure within a man's psyche the anima, the masculine figure within a woman's psyche the animus. This inner figure is not fixed. It develops and evolves as we do, but in its early, undeveloped form, it functions as a powerful unconscious lens through which we perceive potential partners. When we meet someone who matches the qualities of our inner anima or animus, the particular combination of presence and mystery and emotional signature that the inner figure carries, the encounter can feel less like meeting someone new and more like recognition, like remembering something. This is why certain connections feel charged with an intensity that seems entirely disproportionate to how much time you have actually spent together. The charge is not entirely about the person in front of you. Part of it is the inner figure, activated. And if the inner anima or animus remains unconscious and undeveloped, we will keep projecting it onto external people, giving them a power over us that was always, at its root, a power that belonged to us. Reason 5, transference, the final reason, and in some ways the most intimate. Transference is Jung's term, borrowed and expanded from Freud, for the way in which our significant past relationships become a template through which we experience current ones. In its clinical form, it describes the way a patient unconsciously relates to a therapist as if they were a parent, a sibling, a past lover, but transference operates in every relationship we have. The partner you cannot stop trying to earn approval from, even though they have never withheld it, because approval was conditional somewhere in your past. The person you trust completely and without evidence, because someone in your history was completely trustworthy, and this person shares something in their presence that activates that memory without your knowledge. The relationship that makes you feel inexplicably like a child, small, unseen, and somehow responsible for the other person's emotional state. None of these responses belong entirely to the present. They are the past, operating through the present, using the present person as its vehicle. Until the past is brought into consciousness, examined, understood, felt fully, it will continue to write the script. And the current relationship will keep being asked to resolve what only the self, turned inward, can actually resolve. The cost of not looking. Jung was not interested in making people feel guilty about the patterns they had not yet recognized, but he was unsparing about what those patterns cost. The relationship that ends before it could become real, not because the people were wrong for each other, but because one person's unexamined wounds kept recreating conditions the relationship could not survive. The capacity for intimacy that never fully develops, not because the person is incapable of it, but because every time real closeness arrives, something unconscious moves to disrupt it. The decade of the same argument, the same distance, the same rupture and repair with someone you genuinely love and genuinely cannot seem to reach. Jung wrote that the most common human tragedy is not dramatic suffering. It is the unlived life, the version of yourself and your relationships that was always possible, but that the unconscious, left unexamined, never quite allowed. The pattern is not your enemy. It is a messenger, but a messenger that will keep arriving until you are willing to read what it carries. Individuation, the way out. Jung's answer to the repeating pattern was not a better checklist for choosing partners. It was not a list of red flags to watch for. It was not a strategy for finding the right person. It was individuation. The slow, deliberate, often uncomfortable process of becoming genuinely acquainted with yourself, with the blueprint that is directing your choices, with the shadow you have been outsourcing to other people, with the projections you have been mistaking for perception, with the anima or animus you have been casting in the wrong role, with the transferences you have been living inside without knowing they were there. This work is not fast. Jung never claimed it would be, and it is not comfortable. It requires sitting with things you have been moving away from. It requires feeling things you decided, at some point, were not safe to feel. It requires being honest about your own part in the patterns you have been living inside. But what it gives back is something the repeating pattern cannot provide. When you begin to know yourself, when the unconscious material starts to become conscious, when the projection lifts and you can see both yourself and others more clearly, the quality of your relationships changes. Not because you finally found the right person, but because you became someone who is capable of encountering another person rather than simply encountering a reflection of your own unfinished business. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That transformation, two people actually meeting each other rather than meeting their own unconscious projections, is only possible after the inner work has begun, and it is worth everything the inner work costs. Summary: 5 reasons the same relationship keeps finding you. The unconscious blueprint drawn to what feels familiar, even when familiar means painful. Shadow attraction, seeking in others what you have refused to claim in yourself. Projection, falling in love with an image you constructed from your own unconscious and placed over a real person. The anima and animus, casting an inner figure in the role of an outer person and then wondering why they cannot play it. Transference, letting the past write the present without knowing it is happening. None of these are character flaws. None of them make you damaged. All of them are simply the unconscious doing exactly what it was designed to do, Kate, delivering the unresolved material until you are finally ready to receive it. The pattern is not a punishment. It is an invitation. The only question Jung ever really asked was whether you were ready to accept it. Drop a comment and tell us, which of the 5 reasons do you recognize most clearly in yourself? We read every single one. Subscribe to Booked Wisdom for weekly philosophy and psychology that delivered simply, honestly, and without performance. See you in the next one.